What's the word, everybody? Welcome into a new edition of the By the Horns podcast. I'm Cam Smith, along with my guy, Drew Stevens of the Bigs. And know that the By the Horns podcast is presented by Toyota. Toyota has more all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive vehicles than any other brand. So find yours and shine on. Toyota, let's go places. Drew, we got to blow off the dust a little bit on the pod with me and you, because we've had Casey Johnson on. And even it's been a little bit before we had fans listening to what we had with KC, because that was before the Knicks game, and Casey was setting us up with some situations in terms of health with his Bulls team, of heading into this matchup against the New York Knicks, because you're looking at a Bulls team that was going back and forth in that win column. They show some bright spots in that win against the Atlanta Hawks that prior weekend on that Saturday night, but it was a tough task. You're talking about Jalen Brunson, who for some reason has a vendetta against the Bulls. You know, some stars have issues with certain teams and they just go off. And Jalen Brunson coming into that ball game for sure was definitely trending towards having a big night against his Bulls group. But they surprised a lot of people, honestly, Drew, going into the world's most famous arena, getting a nice win. When you think about that win, 124-123, and it was a lot of positives that we can take from that Bulls win. So go ahead and kick it off, Drew. What stood out to you, and what areas did you say, man, okay, if they can copy and paste this for each game, we might be talking about something with this Bulls team?
Probably the first thing that comes to mind is the shot making from Zach LaVine. He went off for 31 points. He looked like he was just at home on Broadway in front of the MSG faithful, knocking down threes, hitting big shots. I think I saw him talking to the crowd here or there a few times. The Bulls shot something like 38% from three, which we've seen them do throughout the season, for the better part of the season. And then Patrick Williams as well, I think that was his best game of the season so far, not only from a box score standpoint, but just him being active and him being, kind of popping off the screen. And that's not something we can say, unfortunately, on a consistent basis for him. That's what we're kind of looking from him. Every season, and this season is no different. He went off for 18 points, almost had his first 20-point outing since last December 28th. Of course, he went down with an injury, so he didn't get a chance to play a lot of games last season. But he showed out, man. I want to say that was the game where he had that tip dunk that kind of came out of nowhere. And
definitely came out of nowhere. I'm like, who's that man in that Bulls 44 jersey? Is right. That is Patrick Williams. Okay.
Exactly. Surprised Billy Donovan too. He didn't know what to do with himself, apparently, man. What stood out to you from that game?
You know what? It's definitely Patrick Williams and what he was able to do when you talked about the 18 points that he scored, but 3 or 4 from three. And that's something that we're seeing with Patrick offensively, where he's not hesitating stepping into his shot. And I know that shot is a little awkward, but, everybody has a different jump shot. But it feels like with Patrick, when he is aggressive, and it's not even just when he catches the basketball. What stood out to me with him was moving without the ball, like his cuts to the rim, a lot of getting on the backside of the defense, and really, honestly, the Knicks defenders forgetting about him. And when you look at it, they should forget about Patrick Williams, because there are no plays being run for Patrick Williams. He has to find himself within his offense and really call for the basketball and set up post situations when he has a smaller defender on his back, but then also cut without the basketball. When you have Nikola Vucevic, who's shooting lights out from the arc, Zach LaVine with his shooting percentages looking very, very strong, Kobe White as well, and Josh Giddey, who is a guy that can create at times with that basketball, you're really awareness-wise are focused on those 4 guys and not Patrick Williams, who let's just be honest, sometimes he's an invisible man out there. But that Knicks game for sure made Tom Thibodeau lose a little sleep, because he's like, wait, how did we forget about this dude, number 44? And I'm sure that's something moving forward, especially January 4th when the Knicks come to the United Center, which will be the second time the Knicks and the Bulls face off on D-Rose night. We know that's going to be a special night inside of the UC, that the Knicks will be locked in on that defensive end and not forget about Patrick Williams, especially as we move towards that game. We got a long time before we get there. Yeah. But it was just his aggression with the basketball and also without the basketball. And joking around, Billy Donovan even said post-game that he felt like he should have called a timeout just to celebrate P. Will after that tip dunk. And for me watching the game at the crib, I'm like standing up like, man, my wife had to yell at me like, you're too loud. I'm like, hey, look, P. Will just called a tip dunk. I'm sorry, babe, but I got to celebrate that man.
Yeah, no, Chicago was standing up like, wait a second, was that P. Will? It's like a catch-22, man, because it threw us all for a surprise. But the fact that it threw us for a surprise is kind of the problem. You'd like to see him be able to stay at a certain level game to game, but unfortunately, we haven't been able to see that from him. He did have a nice little string of double-digit point scored games that kind of came to an end against the Houston Rockets on Sunday. We'll get into that a little bit. Nobody really had a good game against the Rockets, but yeah, man, we're just hoping to see more sustained flashes from P. Will.
Yeah, no doubt about that, man. And going back to Zach LaVine, you talked about what he was able to do offensively. Season high at this point, 31 points against the Knicks at the Garden. And it feels like he always loves stepping into that villain role on the road, which I love as well. Just as a hooper, there's something special about going into another team's arena and just showing up and showing out. Because you're looking at their fans like, you're booing me. You should be booing your team because they let you down. Hey, don't be mad at me. I'm just doing my job. And that's what Zach LaVine was doing inside of the world's most famous arena. So the Bulls get that win, right? I mean, they in that space and time had won 2 of the last 3. Like I said, they beat the Atlanta Hawks in Atlanta. They came back home, and this was the last time that we spoke and tapped into everybody with the pod, was that game against the Cleveland Cavaliers, thinking that the Bulls could get that win. They ultimately lost that ball game, really a hard-fought game for that group. But you move it forward, right? Because not only was Patrick Williams aggressive on the offensive end, but he came up with the game-saving defensive stop against Jalen Brunson. And let's just be real about it. It was more so like basketball gods saying, like, we're going to do you a break. We're going to give you a nice little love right now and allow this basketball, this fadeaway that Jalen Brunson shot, spin in and then spin out, and the Bulls could get the win. So It'll be interesting, again, when this Bulls team faces off against the New York Knicks on January 4th to see, one, where the teams are, but then also, 2, what the energy will be like with both groups heading into that matchup, knowing that the Bulls took the first game of that season. So we move it forward, Drew. Hopefully, we were thinking, all right, you get a win in New York, your confidence should be sky high because the Knicks were a team that was one of the best in offensive and defensive rating. You get a win in their arena, you move it forward, and you're facing off against the Cleveland Cavaliers, round 2 in Cleveland. And this time it was the opening of the Emirates NBA Cup for both of these ball clubs in Group C play in the East. So this is a new court. Obviously, uniforms change a little bit. Maybe that could have added to what the Bulls were feeling coming into this situation. But man, it was a nasty, nasty game. And we're going to do this as a family by the horns, viewers and listeners, because you are our family with me and Drew Stevens. 144 points that the Bulls gave up in that ball game. The most points that team has allowed on the season so far. And we know what the NBA Cup is, Drew. It's a point differential thing. So what we saw last year with DeMar DeRozan in Boston with one of the, at that time, in-season tournament games is what the NBA was calling it. The Bulls took offense because the Boston Celtics were running up the score. And it wasn't like that old school, like, hey, when you're up a certain amount of points, you can't just keep shooting threes. Like, we take that as disrespect. But with this season, you saw towards the end with the Cleveland Cavaliers where they were just hoisting up threes, and that's how they got to 144 points. So we talked about the good in the Knicks game. But, Drew, we got to talk about the challenges that we saw and really some of the 10-step backwards that we saw with this Bulls team, especially on the defensive end.
Yeah, it was a layup line. You talk about Cleveland taking and making threes late in the game, but for the first 3 quarters, there was not much resistance put up whatsoever. And we saw Kobe, Io, and Josh all kind of fall into foul trouble. And we had the situation where Josh, for the 4th straight game at that point in time, was not in the closing lineup. I think did he come in late for inbounds play?
Yeah, I believe he did. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But aside from that, he's not in those closing lineups. And we've talked about it a little bit on this podcast last couple episodes. But yeah, man, that defensive effort just was not there for whatever reason. And unfortunately, it was a precursor to another game in which a lot of the same things were happening. Guys just not seeming to take the challenge,
right?
And just not offering any resistance and kind of making it where it has to be a track meet because you're not putting forth the proper effort on defense to even try to get stopped. So it was a bad look defensively. Like, we know what this team is and isn't, especially on the defensive side of the floor. But when you are putting yourself in a position to just be ran up on, man, it's just not a good look whatsoever, man.
Yeah. And again, it's you leave New York with confidence, and you know that there are a lot of things that you got away with that you can't get away with against the Cleveland Cavaliers, especially at home. And at that time, Cleveland is still, I believe, as we record this podcast, are undefeated. And by the time you hear it, they should still be undefeated. But I believe they're 15-0 as we record this podcast right now. So even at that time, they were still a team that was undefeated. But it was the turnovers, again, that we saw from this Bulls team that really just did them in. I mean, 17 turnovers for this Bulls team and 22 points conceded off of them. And so it was the layup line, as you mentioned, with the Cavaliers and just what they were able to do, 52 points in the paint, 14 fast break points. But let's not get this confused, because this Bulls team still was in striking position and striking distance of this Cavs team before just all hell went to loose in the fourth quarter with just how Cleveland just went on to that onslaught. So there were things there that you can take. But then also you go into Sunday's home game against the Houston Rockets. And it's one thing to say, okay, our previous game, we gave up a season high 144 points. That's just not who we are. We can't give up the straight line drives. We have to do a better job of closing out to 3-point shooters, which the Bulls have done throughout the season. They're one of the better teams at defending the three. I believe teams are shooting just under 35% or right at 35%. So they do a good job of defending the three. But as I mentioned, Sunday happened.
Yeah.
And you talk about layup lines against Cleveland and Cleveland. This was a full layup line inside the United Center against the Houston Rockets. 143 points. Alperen Sengun had his second back-to-back triple-double, and he did it in 25 minutes.
Yeah.
Fred VanVleet, Rockford native, came back. You know, he had his people in the crowd, had 28, 7, and 7. And from – I wouldn't say the jump, but about towards the end of the first, early parts of the second, you can see Houston start to pull away and realize that the Bulls are not putting up any resistance inside of the paint and defending that. So let's exploit that. The Rockets scored 80 points, which was a season high that the Bulls has given up this season in the paint. And then also they were knocking down threes, Drew.
Yeah, and Billy Donovan talked about it after the game, the fact that, you know, with the amount of drives that Houston was doing and the way they were getting inside the paint, nobody on the Bulls attempted to take a charge. We know that the Bulls aren't one of these teams that are going to throw their body in harm's way in terms of drawing offensive fouls. I think coming into that game, and even now as we speak, they've got 2 on the season. Not to talk about Alex Caruso, but he's got 3 by himself.
Oh, the ghost of Alex Caruso once again is here for sure. And I believe the 2 charges that the Bulls have them placed around the 26-point line of NBA teams. I believe they're 26 in that category of taking charges. So
yeah, definitely on the low end. They're definitely on the low end.
And we're not talking about 35th Street for all the South Side.
Right.
We're not talking about the low end, that low end.
Right. And in addition to that, the team not taking charges, Billy Donovan talked about how he feels like this team kind of gets in its own head when their shots aren't falling, and then it affects their play on the defensive side of the ball. And having been around this team the last 2.5 seasons, that's something that unfortunately I've heard from Billy Donovan, man, maybe 4 or 5 times in that time span. And, you know, for a team that relies a lot on their shot making, and us, you know, everybody listen to this pod, we know how fickle jump shots can be, especially when you're taking them from beyond the arc. So if you're letting that kind of dictate the effort you put in on the defensive side of the ball, you're already kind of sunk. Kobe White spoke to how that performance that they had given up another 140 plus points was a disservice to the fans, a disservice to the organization. To a man, they talked about how, you know, they wanted to put forth a better effort, and that although they may not have the defensive stoppers, they don't have an Alex Caruso on the team, they need to compete. So, you know, you and me saying that they need to put forth more effort. It's not just us saying it. These are players themselves putting it out there that, for whatever reason, they are not out there competing as hard as they need to be to put forth the effort to get stops, to put themselves in a position to kind of expand those margins that they have to work with right now.
Yeah, and that's one thing that you can always control no matter what sport you're playing is the effort part of it. And so Kobe White, Zach LaVine, Billy Donovan really basically calling their entire team out. It wasn't like one guy or a couple of guys here. And I love that they do that as a team. They take full accountability. And that shows just the chemistry and trust and strength that they have with each other to be able to call everyone out, right? Nobody is absolved of that. But to say, hey, we have to do better with our effort, with our urgency, because to your point of what Kobe White said, it's a disservice to how he said it, the organization. Yeah. Right. Maybe that's a little North Carolina in Kobe with that organization.
No, Modest says it the same way. I don't know what it is.
Really? Okay. So what's going on? So, I mean, maybe somebody in the DM listening to the By the Horns podcast, are we pronouncing it? Have we been pronouncing organization wrong all these years? Is it organization? Is the I capitalized in organization? What's going on?
It's kind of like Stacey when I hear him say point guard. It's like so much emphasis on like guard. It's like, man, what is going on?
It must be that new English, man. They got new math. Maybe it's the new English that's out. And Kobe and Modest are definitely hip to it. But it's one of those things where when you put that jersey on, and even Kobe said this, with a historic organization and that logo and a franchise, you have to make sure you go out and you give everything that you can. And it just wasn't there against the Houston Rockets. As I mentioned, second most points that they've given up this season. Previous game was 144 to the Cavs, 143 against the Houston Rockets. But one thing that's really glaring to me, Drew, defensively with this team is when they are not making shots and the offense is stagnated, they are allowing teams to just get out and run and really thrive in transition. I mean, the Rockets scored 32 fast break points. That's damn near unheard of when you look at situations, especially for a road team to come in and do that. So you have these deficiencies with this Bulls team on the defensive end, but it really can't dictate, especially when you're not shooting the ball well, you can't have that part of the court lack in who you are because you're just digging yourself a deeper hole.
Exactly. And we know they're not the team that's going to be able to climb out of that hole more often than not. And man, it just goes to show you, man, it's when you talk about the fast break points that Houston had, it's not just the fact of them maybe not getting back, but kind of baked into that is maybe the communication as well. Like, who's getting back? If some guy's taking a three, who's going to be responsible for making sure that no Houston Rockets gets behind them on a fast break? So, again, man, if their shots are falling, if they're not falling, they got to put forth or set a certain standard on that side of the floor,
right?
Just to make sure that they can stay in some of these games. They're not going to pull out many games with a sort of grit and grind kind of style that some teams have. I think only one I would say came close to that was the one they had in Atlanta where they turned the ball over and they didn't shoot particularly well from the three, but they were able to squeeze that out. A lot of times
because we know the Atlanta Hawks are unserious about basketball. So thank you, Atlanta Hawks, Trae Young, for that.
Exactly. But man, it's more serious teams than unserious ones. So the Bulls, they can't play around like that, and they know that. They know that.
Right. And this is nothing new under the sun when it comes to just the game of basketball, but then also at this level in the NBA with this Bulls team, they understand that they can't, have these self-inflicted turnovers, which we've heard Billy Donovan talk about, and expect to win ball games. Like it just doesn't happen. It doesn't work that way unless you're playing against the Atlanta Hawks. And it feels like in Atlanta, you're the probability of winning even more when you turn the ball over 20 plus times is higher. I don't know. It's weird. It's just the Atlanta Hawks, but it's a team that knows it's kryptonite and it's the turnovers. And I think that's the biggest thing for this team. When they're turning that basketball over, it feels like everything else with their attack just drops. Like everything sinks. It's the shooting, it's the transition defense, it's the half-court defense. But it's something as they move forward, they have to understand that despite those turnovers, they still have to play on the other end of the floor and still tighten up things to take care of the basketball and move it forward. So it's a fluid situation, I'll say that, for this Bulls team still in the early part of the year. But the defensive end is the area where they really have to set a tone for themselves night in and night out. And that loss to the Houston Rockets on Sunday at the United Center was the fourth time the Bulls allowed 35 points or more. So, again, you allow an NBA team to put up those type of numbers, Drew, you know what's going to be attached to those numbers. And it's not going to be a W. It's going to be an L in that column.
It really is. And we're not asking this team, nobody's asking this team to be, shut down defenders.
Right.
Or to be, the old school bad boys of Detroit. But you can be handsy. You can have active hands. You can communicate. You can, do a better job of rotating and helping each other so that at least you are contesting more shots than not. You got to be able to put yourself in a better position and kind of moving this thing forward, which I feel like you're about to do. I think that's what they did against Detroit here on Monday.
There we go, man. We connected now. Me and Drew aligned. All the synergy. Hey. We're coordinated because it's perfect. Because we brought up the old school bad boy Detroit Pistons. I'm like, that's a perfect segue into the Bulls' recent game. And this is why I'm still at the United Center. And if you're watching on YouTube, I still have my shirt and tie. Well, not my tie, but just my collar shirt on because I just finished doing the post-game Bulls, Toyota Bulls post-game live along with the pre and halftime show with my man, Kendall Gill, 15-year NBA vet and former Chicago Bull that definitely knows what he's talking about. Mm-hmm. But coming into this game against the Detroit Pistons, this is a young and hungry Pistons team, man. People were thinking, okay, at the start of the season, is this the same team that we saw last year that was playing disgusting basketball? And maybe I'm like channeling my inner Kobe White because I'm saying disgusting. Maybe like the I is capitalized in that one. Maybe it's not even an I. It's an E the way I'm pronouncing it. But they had lost 4 straight, Drew. But since that time, they have really woken up and been a top 6 team in the Eastern Conference. And coming into the game against the Bulls, they have won 2 straight. And this is the tail end of a back-to-back for both of these teams. The Bulls playing Sunday, Detroit playing Sunday as well and getting a win against the Washington Wizards. But Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey, that backcourt has really thrived. Jalen Duren is a young bull inside of that paint for the Detroit Pistons. And they were wearing their City Edition jersey, Drew. And that City Edition jersey was a nod to the Bad Boy Pistons, those back-to-back NBA champion Bad Boy Pistons, man. So I love that you just threw up the lob for me so I can go ahead and take care of that. But going into this ball game, seeing the recent 2 games for this Bulls team, you were concerned, and I was too, about what Bulls team would show up in the D.
Absolutely. And as you alluded to, this is not the same Pistons team. They came into tonight or Monday as we record with the 6th best point differential in the Eastern Conference for what that's worth. Aside from a 30-point loss to the Knicks, they had only one double-digit loss this season. So competitive, kind of that, again, kind of grinding teams down, trying to get into that clutch play. But the Bulls, they played for each other tonight. I think they made a statement just in terms of those back-to-back games against Cleveland and Houston and the porous defense they showed. They did a much better job tonight of communicating with each other, playing for each other, trying to rotate and help when the occasions called for it. Cade Cunningham was in a lot of pick and rolls with Jalen Duren, and I felt like, Cade got his to a certain extent, but I felt like he had to work for it. It wasn't just an easy night at the office for him, obviously, with the Bulls coming away with a 10-point victory. But again, some of that shooting magic, man. They hit, 23 3-pointers? It's the 4th time this season now that they made at least 23s. And there's something weird going on with these road Bulls, as we can start to kind of call them. They're shooting like 40% from 3 on the road and only like 33% at home. They moved
and also above 500. 5-4 on the road as well, compared to 1-5 inside the United Center.
Exactly. I don't know what it is, but they cook to a certain extent. As much as a 5-4 team on the road can cook, they cook on the road. Zach LaVine with a monster game, 6 threes in one quarter. in their fourth quarter alone. It's the most points any Bull has scored in any quarter this season so far.
Yeah.
We had him and Kobe scored 25 apiece. Vooch chipped in with 28. He's now had his fourth game with at least 4 threes, I want to say. So, again, man, when the shot is falling, this team just looks totally different. Obviously, because of the way the game played out, we can't really know, if their shot wasn't falling, would that defensive effort still have been there? But you can only play, the team in front of you, and obviously they made shots and they made enough of them to come out with a win and snap a two-game losing streak tonight.
Yeah, 23 or 46 from 3, as you mentioned. But then also it was from start to finish. And that was the conversation that me and Kendall Gill had for our pregame show for the Bulls, is that they have to come out right away and establish some type of tone, especially looking at the previous 2 games. You have to get some respect put back in your name, because that respect was taken off by those losses to the Cavs and definitely against the Houston Rockets. But you said something very, very key, Drew. You said the Bulls playing for each other. And we saw that tonight, how the basketball was moving around the perimeter, how guys were just stepping into their shots and knocking them down. I mean, they were 7 of 9 from 3 in the first quarter. They started out just flame throwing 77% from that area in the first 10 minutes. And it really didn't stop. And I think the great thing about when we saw Vooch just really thrive and give Isaiah Stewart, who has that Beef Stew nickname, I know he's a fan of it. I'm not a fan of it. Like, he's got to be more creative. But also Jalen Duren, he was giving them issues, because when you have a guy like Nikola Vucevic that is shooting the way he's shooting from the 3, nearly 50%, but then also just his touches and how his just movements are from different areas of the floor, mid-range, right inside of the paint, the hooks, the quick turnarounds. Even we saw a couple of step backs from Vooch off the spin. You don't have any type of defensive game plan for him, especially younger guys like Isaiah Stewart and Jalen Duren. So that allowed Vooch to really get his game going early and having that season high in points tonight. But then when he started to slow down just a little bit, it was a Zach LaVine show. 6 threes in the fourth quarter. I mean, Zach, 6 of his 7 threes came in the fourth quarter. But Zach was one of those dudes who we've seen before, not only against Detroit, but inside of Little Caesars Arena. If you want to throw it all the way back to last season, back in October, where Zach dropped 51 against them in a little over 30 minutes. He knows that he can find his spots and get his shots against the Pistons, man. So it was one of those breath of fresh air for this Bulls team. And they only gave up 112 points against a Pistons team that can really score the basketball. So defensively and offensively, you really got to tip your hat to this team. As much as we scrutinized them and discussed the last couple of losses for them, how it wasn't the Bulls team that we've been accustomed to seeing, right? This team really fought for each other and got respect put back on their name with this win against the Pistons. Yeah,
and to your point about how the ball was moving, Zach and Josh each had, I want to say, 5 assists at the half. The Bulls had assisted on like 21 baskets, I want to say, but they made field goals. And Zach was kind of the embodiment of that. He was kind of taking what the defense was giving him initially in this game, not trying to do too much, not forcing things here and there at times, maybe going AWOL, so to speak. But then he went ham in the fourth quarter. The Bulls might not have a Anthony Edwards or a Luka Doncic, but they do have a Zach LaVine who I don't want to call him streaky because he's too efficient, I think, for that. For that turn to be put on him. But when he gets hot, man, as we saw tonight and as we've seen different points of his career, like it's just almost unstoppable. And because the Pistons, for whatever reason, chose to just let him go one-on-one and weren't trying to double him to get the ball out of his hands until it was too late, it's not a whole lot you can do at that point. And he kind of put the game away at 10-point victory.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the teams where you look to just – from a physicality standpoint, we know that Detroit has played the Chicago Bulls very tough just the past few years when you think about that young core of Cade Cunningham and Jalen Duren and Isaiah Stewart. And the Bulls always sometimes have some issues with the Pistons. They split the 4 games last year. And so it's not an easy situation for the Bulls of walking into Little Caesars Arena and facing off against this Pistons team. But from the get-go, and even when they had their lapses defensively, when the Pistons made their run towards the end of the second half, or actually, the second quarter, and in that third quarter, the Bulls were able to respond. It was either Kobe White coming up with a big shot or Nikola Vucevic coming up with a big play. Ayo Dosunmu, who had himself a nice game as well, coming up with moments for this team just to kind of keep their heads above water. And you need plays like that. You need guys like that to step up when Nikola Vucevic has those little lapses where he's carried the load for an extended period of time. And he's human. He's going to need his rest. He's going to need somebody else to step up. And that's when you look at guys, like I mentioned, Ayo Dosunmu, who had 9 points off the bench, +8 in the plus minus for this team, step up and do some things on both ends of the court. So there's this thing that I wish we could just do with the Bulls. And I'm sure every NBA team would love to do this, but just copy and paste what we saw tonight against the Pistons in Little Caesars Arena and do it every single game. Every single game. If you do that, then we're talking something big. But obviously, we live in a realistic world, and it's a long NBA season, and the players are human, and they will have their letdowns. But you don't want letdowns like we saw against the Houston Rockets. But this was something, to me, pivotal for this team, especially after that loss to Houston, where they were able to bounce back on the tail end of a back-to-back. And hopefully, with Billy Donovan and that conversation within the locker room, they have to remind each other, like, hey, we know who we are. If we get to what we do best, then nobody will be able to hang with us. And I'm not saying that this is a team that beat the Lakers or, the Golden State Warriors or the Denver Nuggets or the Boston Celtics or just some of these top tier teams in the East or the West. But still, this is a good win for this Bulls group, coming off of 2 tough back-to-back losses for this team against a solid Detroit Pistons team, Drew. So there's something there that you can feel proud about. And
don't let these teams walk you down, man. We saw a little chippiness between Dalen and Beef Stew.
No, don't.
Isaiah Stewart, we saw a little bit of that. But it was good to see Dalen not just, tuck his tail. Not that he would. I think Dalen's kind of been looking for the smoke this season.
A little bit
of that with Dillon Brooks on Sunday. So not that I would expect Dalen to, but it was good to see that kind of come out. I'm glad that obviously it didn't come to fisticuffs and it was just kind of I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. We're right here. My team is here. We here to play. We're here to fight. Like, we need to see that from this team more often. So again, whether it's the way they were communicating on the defensive side of the ball, helping each other out, or Dalen Terry stepping up to the challenge and letting Isaiah Stewart know that he's going to be there all night and you're not just going to throw us around. It's not going to be that tonight. We're not on that. Like, that was good to see.
Yeah, for sure. They definitely had heart for the fight. Drew, I love saying that phrase, man. And they for sure had heart for the fight, especially Dalen Terry going up against Isaiah Stewart. I'm not going to call that man Beef Stew no more. Like, I can't do it. I can't do it. He needs a new nickname. And look, it is what it is. It is what it is.
I wasn't even going to say it to you in my head.
But you know what? I have to take it here because it was good to have something positive on this night because, unfortunately, the Bulls lost a huge person to their franchise's history and just one of the great people of all time in this world. And that's Bob Love, Bulls legend, who lost his battle to cancer at the age of 81. And Butterbean, as a lot of people like to call him, I'm just thinking about my parents and my grandparents and aunts and uncles that went to go see Bob Love at the old Chicago Stadium. And this was back in the day when you can talk to the players after the game, post game, anybody. Like, you didn't have to have a special pass. You could take pictures with the players, and just hearing the stories from my grandfather and my uncles and my father and my mother talk about Bob Love and Jerry Sloan and Norm Van Leer and just how personable those guys were. But then also Bob Love just being a great dude, man. And I think that's what has really cemented Bob Love in so many different people's just mind and just have them tattooed on their brain, because he's a guy that, as great as he was as a basketball player, was an even better person. And the Bulls released a statement just, of who Bob Love was and just what he's meant to this franchise, but also the city of Chicago and the many communities in the city of Chicago. So we just want to share our condolences to Bob Love's family, his wife, Emily, his close friends, just everybody that was connected to Bob Love. I'm sure he brought joy and happiness to your life in so many different ways. And a guy that is still one of the greatest Bulls of all time. Drew, number 3 on the all-time scoring list in Chicago Bulls franchise history, and was number 1 before some dude, Michael Jeffrey Jordan, came around and some dude named Scottie Pippen came around to overtake him on those spots. But it's still impressive to have Bob Love top 3 all-time on the Bulls all-time scoring list. And if you're in the United Center and you look up at the rafters, you're going to see that number 10 jersey hanging up in the rafters of Bob Love. So when you think of Bob Love, man, what comes to mind for you?
Man, I don't really know if I can say anything more eloquent than you already did, but just another franchise icon. I think, having read about what he went through in terms of his speech impediment and what he did to work on that, just humanized him more, very endearing to hear about that and what he did to improve himself in that capacity. When I would see him on TV, always had a smile on his face, seemed to be a very smooth guy, maybe kind of a translation of his style of play. But yeah, man, very unfortunate to hear that he passed. We got the message, the tweet from the Chicago Bulls during the game tonight. So yeah, man, condolences to his family, his loved ones, friends, everybody, man. Rest in peace.
Yeah, definitely. Rest in peace, rest in power to the great Bob Love. And he's always going to be with us and also the Chicago Bulls franchise and just the city of Chicago because he was so endearing both on and off the court. And that's just what makes Bob Love so special. So that will do it for this edition of the By the Horns podcast. The Bulls are back in action Wednesday night in Milwaukee against a struggling Bucks team. We'll see if they can transfer that good energy on the road and try and improve to 6-4 on the road and then transfer that energy one more time, and actually not one more time, but a lot of times return back home Friday night and Saturday night, because Friday night they have the Atlanta Hawks, Drew, who we know are unserious about basketball. And then they turn around Saturday night and play the Memphis Grizzlies, who the Bulls came back from 20 points down in Memphis a little bit, maybe about a month ago around this time, to get another win for themselves. So It was a great win tonight for this Bulls team. And yes, I'm using great with this win against the Detroit Pistons because coming off of what we saw the past couple of games, they needed this win. They played for each other. They got back into their philosophy of who they are. And we saw Zach LaVine be Zachary Thomas LaVine. And when I'm throwing out the government name, I'm serious on it. And Nikola Vucevic being great as well. So again, that does it for this edition of the By the Horns podcast presented by Toyota. And know that Toyota has more all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive vehicles than any other brand. So find yours and shine on. Toyota, let's go places. He's Drew Stevens. I'm Cam Smith. We will talk to you soon. Take care, everybody.